I'm Andrew, and I founded Frog last year in March, I think it was. I am Frog. There's only me, so I'm the only literary agent there. And so yeah, I kind of acquire or take on all the clients that we kind of represent. We only represent queer writers, so anyone who falls under the kind of LGBTQIA plus umbrella. The reason we started it was because I say we, but it is only me. But I think collectively it was because it was about increasing representation in the publishing industry, both in terms of authorship, but also in terms of content. But importantly, our writers don't have to write about queer issues. They can write about anything. What's most important is that the writer themselves kind of identifies as queer in whatever capacity that is. And we represent clients across fiction and non-fiction. We don't do children's and kind of YA or poetry. And yeah, to date, we've sold kind of books across both sort of territories with big and large kind of publishers. And yeah, which I think in the background, there's always this sense of wanting to do something different and kind of experimental and kind of pushing boundaries in terms of representation and stories and just making sure that queer people feel that they're kind of being seen within the industry and kind of within the books they're reading. Yeah, so as I said, we do fiction and non-fiction. In terms of non-fiction, it's kind of broad. Narrative non-fiction, non-fiction across kind of any genre, really. Like in terms of like history or politics or sport or kind of music and culture, literary theory. It can kind of be anything, really. We're not too prescriptive. I would say that we don't really do straight memoir as such, particularly not straight memoir. But I think only because the market's quite tough. And unless you're kind of a celebrity, I think it's quite difficult to sell those books. But, books that have a kind of personal element to them, kind of memoir within them, obviously that kind of narrative nonfiction side of things is kind of absolutely fine. And then in terms of fiction, again, fairly broad, not too prescriptive, but, literary fiction, that's kind of a personal passion of mine, and commercial fiction. And then within kind of commercial, particularly romance and crime, we've had kind of success with, historical as well. We don't, and also thriller, I should say, crime and thriller. We don't do sci-fi and fantasy. That one, despite the fact that fantasy I know is very kind of booming market at the moment. It's not my expertise and it's something I have struggled with. So that's not for us. Or anything that's kind of more in the sort of YA territory, it wouldn't be quite suitable. But yeah, those are kind of the genres that we sort of cover. And then in terms of more like specifics, as I said, anything that's kind of doing something different, pushing those boundaries, particularly in kind of queer writing, there's a lot of kind of outdated sort of tropes that often come time and again, well, published time and again. Anything that's kind of moving away from that, I think would be really great to see. For example, having characters in books who maybe are queer, but it's not about them being queer. I think that's something that still could be done a lot of. Definitely that kind of intersectionality, queer people of color, for example, as kind of narrators would be great to see more of that. I really like that side of things. And obviously it goes without saying things like strong characterization, strong plot, inventive storytelling is really important to me as well. Making sure that you thought through everything and it kind of makes sense as a whole. Especially if you have something that's got a really strong hook to it, or it's quite a kind of not kind of out there idea, making sure that idea makes sense as a whole and is completely believable. I think that's kind of important as well. And I suppose finally, I should say, I kind of mentioned it previously, but what you're writing, again, doesn't have to be queer. It doesn't have to feature queer people. It could be a romance novel between two straight people. That's not a problem. As I said, it's always about the kind of author and their identity. That's kind of important to us. I think the first piece of advice would be around the extract and just making sure that extract accurately reflects the tone of the book, or gives a really strong sense of what the rest of the book is like. That isn't always the opening to a novel or a non-fiction book. So I think that's really important to get right. I think it's also really important to be able to sell your work. That's something that will happen regardless of this kind of process. You know, if you go to an agent or a publisher, being able to sell your work succinctly and knowing exactly what it is about. I think it's always good to kind of challenge yourself and try and sell your book within 10 seconds. You know, if someone asks you about it, how could you sell it to them? I think that's really good. And if you struggle to do that, then maybe you haven't quite got that kind of clarity around the idea that you're kind of trying to get published. Um, in terms of the synopsis, you know, it's good to be really succinct with that, highlighting the central themes, the characters, the plot points, and try not to get too bogged down in unnecessary detail. There'll be lots kind of going on in your book that you'll want to kind of convey to someone, but you kind of want to just give the kind of top line stuff that's kind of going to engage an agent or a publisher. And then a really simple one, but just check your writing for errors. It is always a bit disappointing when you're reading a submission and there's kind of grammatical errors throughout. It doesn't set the kind of right tone for that submission. So I think that's really important as well.